Good morning. Thank you for joining Mayor Brown's Global Financial Markets Teleconference Series. Today's call is entitled ICE Benchmarks Consultation on U.S. Dollar LIBOR Settings. My name is Jenny Kratochvil, and I'm a partner in Mayor Brown's Chicago office and a member of our banking and finance practice. First, a couple of housekeeping items. As regular listeners will know, this call is being recorded. We will be emailing an audio link to all participants should you wish to listen to the teleconference again or forward it to your colleagues. In addition, the recording will also be available as a podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Since we will not have a Q&A session, please send your questions regarding today's topic by email to gfm@mayorbrown.com, and we will respond promptly. This is the same email address on your invitation email. Joining me today is Mayor Brown partner David Duffee. David is a partner in our New York office and is the leader of our New York banking and finance practice. He advises financial institutions and borrowers in lending transactions, both for U.S.-based borrowers and in cross-border financings, and a significant part of his focus is on Latin American lending. With that brief introduction, we will now begin today's discussion. David, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. For most of the year 2020, we thought we knew what the timeline was for the transition from LIBOR to its designated replacement SOFR. We were pretty confident that LIBOR would go away at the end of 2021, although there was certainly a risk that it might go away earlier in 2021. And parties were planning or thinking about planning how to deal with the cessation of LIBOR quotations with that timeline in mind. Then, on November 30th of last year, there were a series of coordinated announcements that upended everyone's expectations and certainly materially changed people's planning. There were three announcements, one from ICE Benchmark Administration, another from the Financial Conduct Authority, and then a third from the U.S. banking regulators. The key announcement was the announcement from ICE Benchmark Administration. And I, in today's presentation, am only going to talk about the implications of those three announcements for United States dollars and only with respect to loan products, although all of the announcements dealt with currencies other than dollars or in addition to dollars and also have implications for products other than loans. So what did IBA say? ICE Benchmark Administration said they were going to have a consultation, which is the mechanism by which IBA goes about making decisions. It wasn't any material decision they would have to make would go through a similar consultation process. And what the consultation was intended to address was the proposal that 1 week and 2-month LIBOR cease being quoted at the end of this year, at the end of 2021, first, and second, that all other LIBOR tenors continue to be quoted until June 30, 2023. Obviously, a dramatic extension of the timeline from what people were expecting before the announcement on November 30. I'm going to go through in sort of roughly chronological order the implications of the three announcements, and in doing that, I'll talk about in more detail about what the U.S. bank regulators said about the IBA announcement. I'll go through in chronological order some of the implications of that announcement and highlight what I think are probably the biggest takeaways or the most important things that arose out of those series of coordinated announcements. First, let's talk about that consultation process, and that's really the first thing that's going to happen now, and that is the ICE Benchmark Administration has solicited views from its constituencies. It has obtained all those views, and now we are waiting for it to make its formal announcement of the results of that consultation. I think most parties think that it's a foregone conclusion that that consultation process will have resulted in an agreement that 1 week and 2 month LIBOR will go away at the end of this year, and that the other LIBOR tenors will continue to be quoted through 6/30/2023. That really should occur any day now. It will be interesting to see exactly how that amendment is formulated. How that announcement is formulated and how they give the results of the consultation. And that, I think, leads to the second implication of the announcements. And that is, unlike the situation before the November 30 announcements, where we were pretty confident that LIBOR was going to go away at the end of this year, but there was a risk that it could go away earlier than the end of this year, there is an expectation that there will be some statement with the results of the consultation, either from the ICE Benchmark Administration or from the FCA, that in fact there will be assurances given that LIBOR for U.S. dollars will continue to be quoted through June 30, 2023. That will give parties a level of confidence in the future that they didn't have or don't have now in the absence of that sort of comfort from ICE Benchmark Administration or the FCA. Once the results of that consultation are announced, and once we have at the same time presumably some comfort given about the continuation of LIBOR quotations in 2023, the next step in the process is the fact that lenders and administrative agents may need to notify counterparties in their loan documentation of the fact that that notice has been given. Certainly, under the ARC's hardwired approach, to the extent that agreements have that language in it, the administrative agent would be required to give a notice to the other lenders and the borrower. But also probably under amendment approach documentation in all its variations. Parties to loan documents, lenders and administrative agents, are right now going through a diligence process to try to figure out what sort of notice they're obligated to provide to counterparties. It is also possible that the notice from the IBA, the results of the consultation, may require other things to be done under a credit agreement. For example, the beginning of a negotiation process to result in a replacement for LIBOR. Counterparties do need to look at their documentation and determine whether, in fact, there are things that they need to do other than giving the notice. The next thing that I think is important for people to realize is that this announcement from the IBA is, and I'll use this term loosely, a trigger event under most amendment approach documents and most hardwired documents. However, it is not, or does not require, under most documentation, an immediate transfer of or change in the pricing from LIBOR to SOFR. It is an event that it is an announcement by IBA that there is a specified date by which LIBOR is going to go away, but under most documentation, the transfer from LIBOR to SOFR doesn't need to happen until the date LIBOR actually goes away or some period just before LIBOR goes away. The next implication, which is, I think, one of the biggest implications of the announcement by the IBA, is that the spread adjustment will be fixed as of the date of that announcement. As you will recall, once pricing on a loan changes from LIBOR to SOFR, because SOFR is generally speaking a lower rate than LIBOR, SOFR will need to be adjusted. There will need to be an additional spread added to SOFR to make it an appropriate fallback from LIBOR. Bloomberg has been publishing what that spread adjustment will be every day based on the methodology determined by ISDA and the ARC. But once this announcement is officially made by IBA, that spread adjustment will be fixed forever whenever it is, for example, in the hardwired approach or in connection with the New York state legislation regarding falling back to SOFR. That spread adjustment will be fixed for all time.
So, David, does that mean that if the spread adjustment is fixed in, say, February 2021, it will apply to loans that are outstanding in July of 2023? And isn't that a problem?
Well, yes, Jenny, that's absolutely right. We will be fixing a spread adjustment today in February of 2021 that's unlikely to be used in loan products until the middle of 2023. And a number of commentators have said that doesn't make sense. The world could be a very different place in 2023 than it is today, and fixing a spread adjustment today may give rise to concerns about the usefulness of that spread adjustment for loans that are going to be outstanding in 2023. One response that the ARC and bank regulators might give to that concern is that parties always have the ability, anytime before 2023, to change the pricing on their loan to SOFR pricing with whatever margin they think is appropriate for a SOFR-priced loan at that time. And then they're not bound by and don't need to be stuck with a spread adjustment calculation that's being made in 2021. One of the biggest immediate implications of the announcements of November 30, in addition to the fixing of the spread adjustment, is the statement by the bank regulators that went along with the IBA statement. And what the bank regulators said, among other things, is that loans, starting on the date of the advice, November 30, 2021, new loans made by banks should have robust fallback language with clearly defined alternative rates when LIBOR permanently ceases to be announced. Clearly, the hardwired language that has been promulgated by the ARC would satisfy the bank regulators. The bank regulators in their advice didn't specify that the hardwired approach was the only language that would satisfy their guidance. But this does mean that lenders do need to focus on their fallbacks and determine whether the fallbacks that they're putting in new deals this year comply with the regulatory guidance from the bank regulators.
David, do we have any guidance as to what other fallbacks will meet the regulators' test?
Good question, Jenny, and I don't think that we do. As I said, we know the hardwired approach works, and probably something that is similar to the hardwired approach in concept would also work. I am sure that there are other fallbacks that would work, a fallback to a clearly defined rate that is intended to address the permanent cessation of LIBOR, but we really have no clear guidance from the regulators, which I think means that banks, if they're uncomfortable with a hardwired approach falling back to a SOFR-based rate, will need to talk to their regulators about their proposed fallback. The guidance says that use of a non-compliant fallback, i.e. a fallback that's not robust with a clearly defined replacement rate, could present safety and soundness issues in the eyes of the bank regulators. The next implication, again, talking about them in chronological order, and this is probably the last implication that I'm going to talk about today, is the fact that the regulators said in their November 30 guidance that even though LIBOR will continue to be quoted through June of 2023, their regulatory guidance is that there should be no new originations of loans priced at an interest rate based on LIBOR after December 31st of 2021. You will remember, or you may remember, that the ARC had earlier suggested that lenders should be not making LIBOR-priced loans after June 30 of 2021, and the ARC has repeated that they think that June 30 date is achievable, notwithstanding that the regulators have given the December 31st date. But of course, the ARC is not a regulatory body, and so its advice, its suggestions, its view of the world is probably of less importance to regulated entities than it is of the regulators themselves, who have drawn a very clear line in the sand about no new quotations, no new pricing of LIBOR loans after the end of this year. There is, in the guidance, some suggestion that there could be some limited exceptions to that rule, but we don't know a lot about what those exceptions are likely to be.
So, David, that guidance, though, I think, if I understand you correctly, it applies to banks, and that banks can't make new loans priced at LIBOR after this year. But what does that mean for non-banks?
Good question, and you're absolutely right. The regulators can only regulate banks, and it is certainly possible, since LIBOR is going to continue to be quoted, that non-bank parties can continue to originate new products and make new loans priced at a rate based on the London Interbank Offered Rate as quoted by ICE Benchmark Administration. And there's really nothing anyone can do to stop them from doing that. It is, and generally speaking, bank regulators care about banks, so they, generally speaking, don't care what other people do. In the area of LIBOR transition, however, certainly the Federal Reserve System has broader concerns about LIBOR, broader than its use among banks. And there's no doubt that the Fed wants everybody to stop using LIBOR at the end of this year. They see substantial systemic risks to the international financial markets if parties continue to use an interest rate that they think is could cause significant its use could cause significant danger to the international financial system. So the Fed will certainly not be pleased if there is a substantial use of LIBOR to set the interest rate on new products after December 31st. It will be interesting to see if there is, what non-banks do in their lending products, whether they move to SOFR like the banks are anticipated to do, or if they continue to use LIBOR. And I think, even though I said that was going to be the final implication, I think I'd like to say one more thing, which is probably the most obvious thing, and that is at Thanksgiving time of last year, when people were thinking about the work ahead of them in 2021, it was going to be an enormous task. If LIBOR ended at the end of this year, that meant that all LIBOR-priced debt instruments would need to have a new reference rate and a new pricing mechanism applied to those instruments, whether through an amendment with repricing, whether through a fallback, either an amendment approach or a hardwired approach. That was a task of almost inconceivable magnitude, and one that had to happen all during the course of 2021. The fact that, at least for legacy products, not for new products, but for legacy products, LIBOR will continue to be quoted through the middle of 2023 is an enormous relief to all of the parties in the market who now have, a respite from that task. And instead of having that task needing to be done by the end of this year, they've got till the middle of 2023. And the regulators certainly hope, and I think the market hopes, that the quantum of debt instruments that it will mature or be repriced in the ordinary course before June 30th, 2023, will represent the vast majority of the LIBOR price contracts, so that when we get to June 30, 2023, in fact, there are very few debt instruments in the market that will need to rely on a fallback or an amendment to change their pricing. So that is certainly, from the point of view of the people who had to affect the change in the pricing of all these debt instruments, that is certainly a happy result of the November 30, 2020 announcement. Jenny?
Thank you, David. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. A few brief reminders. You will receive an email with a link to the recording of today's call, and the recording will also be available as a podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Lastly, as mentioned before, if you have any questions related to today's content, please email them to gfm@mayorbrown.com. Thank you again for your participation. You may all now disconnect.